What movie would be better if it didn't have a happy ending? Rambo's original ending was great, where he ends up killing himself because of PTSD and not being able to readjust to society, etc. But it didn't test well with the focus groups, so they changed it to be more positive. And then obviously it spawned sequels which turned the series a bit more campy and lost the original message a bit. But I think if they'd have kept the original ending, it might not have done so well in the theaters, but would be looked back on as a bit more of a poignant story and lost the original message a bit. I think you mean the later movies lost the original message completely. I'm no Rambo lore master, but I'd say the movie where he goes into Vietnam to rescue POWs left behind, whichever movie that is, kind of retains at least some of the original themes of vets being shafted following the Vietnam War. But I agree it's pretty flimsy. I think the original ending for Rambo First Blood would have been pretty bold for Hollywood in the 80s and would have elevated that movie beyond just a great action movie to something a bit more important. War of the Worlds. No way the son makes it back alive. Was hoping someone would say this. I remember seeing it in theaters and enjoying myself. Then that scene happens, and I instantly got turned off from the movie. I'm pretty sure I'm correct saying literally everyone in the audience I saw it with groaned when the son showed up at the end. An old one, but My Fair Lady. It's based on the play Pygmalion by Bernard Shaw, and in that version Eliza realizes Henry treats her terribly and she deserves kindness, so she leaves him. The musical movie version is the complete opposite of that and annoys me more than it should. Agreed. I thought her ending was kind of sad because of that. She lost all her old friends and her old life because she didn't fit into lower class society anymore. And now she has to settle for being married to her tutor, who mainly likes showing her off and not her as a person. I don't think he ever intended to marry her. I think he just wanted her as a companion. She doesn't get espoused. She doesn't fit in properly anywhere anymore. Hancock. That movie was so good until that bullshit love story was slapped in there. Yeah, WTF was that? That came out of nowhere. I think they had different writers and that second half of the movie was a different writer from the first. Seriously, it's like they slapped two movies together. Legend of Sleepy Hollow with Johnny Depp. The last 20 minutes of the film tie up all the loose ends, but they don't match the atmosphere of the rest of the film. It would have worked if they'd taken more time to establish his character as a good detective. They showed he was smart with science, but he could have been more competent. Yeah, I think they were trying too hard for humor to the extent that it hurt the storyline, so it couldn't be well displayed. The In-Betweeners 2 with the boys dying in the Australian outback. The Golden Compass. The movie specifically made the ending a happy one, deviating from the source material in a major way. The movie stopped early. It wasn't really much of an ending. The TV show is much better. The TV show is much better. Yeah. Although I would have liked to see what they could have done with the original cast. But this script pace. I really liked the actors' individual performances in the movie. They were just working with a shit script. Wonder Woman. The lesson near the end is that the god of war doesn't exist, and it's just men who are fighting without supernatural encouragement. Then the real god of war arrives, and that lesson gets ignored. It would have been better movie if they left out the god of war and Wonder Woman couldn't do anything to stop man's violent nature. Yeah, they try to work around that by having him say stuff like, oh, I only nudge them, this is what they are really like. But yeah, it kinda undermines the whole narrative of an IEWW who has to discover that this is the way the world works when there is a literal god of war pulling strings. And as soon as he does, everyone hugs each other. People can be evil. That's a valid point. If they really wanted a literal god of war, which I kind of liked, that she was right and we did get to see her big fight, then why didn't they make it that even after he was killed, people didn't just instantly stop fighting? That people are still evil, ruthless, cruel, hateful. I don't know, it's been a while since I saw the movie, but that stuck with me. The Hobbit. But not in the way you think. The big issue with those movies is that they focus too much on the ring, when in reality, it wasn't super dangerous at that point. The whole point was that Gandalf doesn't suspect anything yet. It should have just been a magic ring until the very last scene. where Bilbo stands at his porch and all of a sudden starts frantically looking for his ring, only to give it the look. Bam. Cut to black. None of this full circle crap. Cut out old Bilbo and Frodo. Just end the happy fairy tale with the revelation that something is wrong. Gandalf suspected something, but he didn't know what. At that point he didn't know much of ring lore, but he certainly knew about the 3 he had one lent to him by certain the shipwright spoiler, and probably knew about the 9. So when he finally learned about the ring, remember that Bilbo didn't tell the dwarves until Gandalf had left them at the edge of Mirkwood. He probably suspected that it was one of the 7. Or possibly another one unaccounted for, maybe created in imitation of the rings he knew. Or at a long shot one of the 9 whose history he got wrong. But one of the wonderful things about the books that didn't really make it into either trilogy of the movies is how Hobbit-centric it is. Everything that Frodo and Sam do is described in detail. Almost everything that Merry and Pippin do is described in detail. The only truly lacking bit is a description of the Ents. Most of what Legolas and Gimli do is well described, but from less of a protagonist view. Aragorn's actions are sometimes told second-hand or after the fact, as when he takes the paths of the dead. Gandalf's actions are often told in flashback, his imprisonment by Saruman, for example, and Boromir's actions are only described second-hand. This makes sense if you think of the book as being written by Frodo. He would have had long conversations with Sam and Merry and Pippin until he left to go over the sea. Legolas and Gimli probably visited often. Aragorn might have shown up once and may have written his account down himself, but he was too busy being a king to give great detail. Boromir, alas, and Gandalf simply couldn't explain everything he did, both because trying to explain it would place a burden on the hobbits, and because he simply wasn't good at explaining. How is ring lore so lost to Gandalf when Elrond straight up witnessed so much of it? Like, how is the ring a surprise to the guy that knew about it not being destroyed? In the books, there's no scene where Elrond tells Isildur to destroy it. They know the ring is cut off Sauron's finger and that is Isildur is killed by orcs after keeping it, but the fact that it doesn't turn up for 3,000 years makes it not a prime suspect. The original ending of Little Shop of Horrors should have stayed. Seymour wasn't a good person. He's a piece of shit. When you fuel your own selfish desires like this, it can transform into a huge problem, and everyone suffered because of it. Honestly, Audrey should have won. Seymour doesn't deserve a happy ending, but I must say in the original ending, I really hate the part where the old people are relaxing and then get attacked by Audrey too. It makes it a bit hard to watch, but the rest of the ending is just pure epic and terrifying in a good way. Edit, I'm referring to the 1980 film adaptation, which is pretty good until the end in my opinion. The original ending of this version had Audrey 2 winning like every other time, but they changed it. Edit 2 otherwise. I ducking love this movie and its characters. Even Seymour. I like Seymour as a character, but I just don't think he's some sympathetic hero who should get the happy ending. Edit 3 so, yes, I've realized Seymour is a little more morally grey than I initially thought. It's a little more complicated than he's a piece of shit, but all the same, when you do the sort of screwed up things Seymour did, consequences can and will happen. The musical still has that ending. Little Shop of Horrors is so much better when Audrey and Seymour end up dead and Audrey takes over the world. It's a much better character arc for everyone involved, especially Seymour. At least when he and Audrey died there were some ducking consequences for murder. I was really confused when it was announced that The Descent Part 2 was being made, considering that Sarah, the last character left alive, dies right at the end of the film. Was this going to be a sequel investigating the disappearance of the Cavers? Was it going to be a prequel? It turns out, neither. The end of the original film was rewritten for American audiences after test screenings revealed that they thought the original ending was too depressing. I'm of the opinion that the original ending was far more powerful and horrifying, but I suppose that filmmaking is a money-making enterprise and North America is a huge market. It just feels weird to have a sequel to a cut of a film that was never released theatrically in the UK. The original script to Mrs. Doubtfire apparently had the parents getting back together, but they decided to go with the ending we know today instead to show kids that the world doesn't end just because mom and dad stay apart. Speaking as someone who grew up with parents that did nothing but shout and argue, I think the ending they went for is the happy one. By the end, they divorce and can be civil to each other. If they get back together, they're just back to square one. On a slightly separate note, I remember at the time thinking that it's okay for your parents to get divorced because of how the film laid it out. Although my parents didn't divorce today, I learned my adult years. I like to think that this film would have helped many kids not feel so guilty or shameful about their parents separating. I'm trying to remember from my childhood, but I'm pretty sure divorce was a lot less common back then. Passengers. Chris Pratt dying and leaving Jennifer Lawrence with the decision of being alone or waking up another person from hypersleep would have saved that movie. Frozen 2. Arendelle been destroyed by that flood, and the townspeople would have been safe. They were moved out because the voice knew a flood was coming. Yep, I thought it was going to be a Thor Ragnarok style ending where they just rebuild somewhere else. The Devil Wears Prada. In the book, Andy does not give the clothes to her co-worker Emily. She sells them in a second-hand store to pay rent. And most of all, Miranda doesn't send a no. Andy is great, you should hire her letter to the magazine. They give a cookie cutter ending. I actually think the movie is a different story. Sure, they share a lot of things, but the devil, pardon the pun, is in the details. The book's Andy and Miranda are much less relatable and much more human. And the gist of the book is less corporate life versus personal life and more that bitch doesn't deserve her job. And I was right to piece the duck out. The sequel novel is unadaptable into a movie because the details diverge the story so much, and Miranda is barely in it, and is more about how busy work mom strides despite being second guessed by two-faced friends. For my money, I like the movie better as it was more of a general life story, while the book was a scandalous tell-all from Vogue's editor-in-chief's sex assistant. They took that and made another story. Pretty Woman. In the original ending, he just dumped her back in the street, but test audiences didn't like it, so they tweaked the movie and completely changed the ending. Made it a love story instead of what it was originally written as. Gives the whole movie a different meaning. The original was much more gritty. Julia Roberts was a drug addict in the original. Back to the Future 3. Should ended with Doc leaving a hidden message in the past for Marty, or delivering him another letter, thanking him for his friendship and letting him know that he's content living out his days with Clara. I hate that flying ducking steampunk train and Ox Willy Wonka ass clothes and that creepy child. It still would have been a happy ending, I guess. Just a bittersweet one, rather than an all-out goof. This may seem dumb, but in Frozen 2 I hated the ending. The entire movie felt like it was lost, and then right at the end, when stakes were finally there and something cold had been lost, Nope Elsa rides in on her water horse and saves the day. People like to say it's just a kids movie. Relax. Whenever I bring this up, but plenty of kids movies and TV shows have dealt with this kind of stuff and many are still loved to this day. Imagine how cool an ending would be where after the kingdom was destroyed we get a small montage of the citizens of Arendelle and the Lost Forest working together to rebuild the kingdom, showing that now they can finally be united as one instead of that stupid ending where Elsa leaves again. Fight Club. Spoiler, in the book he winds up in a psychiatric hospital, which, let's face it, bit more realistic. Spoiler, he's convinced he's in heaven, but the hospital is full of employees who are part of Project Mayhem and are plotting to get Tyler back. It's real Decaroid. There needs to be more movies with the bad guys winning. Passengers. I'm Legend. Hancock. If I'm Legend kept true to the actual book, the ending would have been much better. The ending in the book was definitely more jaw-dropping. Breakfast at Tiffany's. The ending of the book was that Paul lets her go. The point of the book was a critique on the author's mother, who would use people and run from her problems like Holly. She spends most of the movie being charmingly shitty and it all works out. Boo. I can't believe no one's mentioned 28 Days Later. The official release that was in theaters DVDs has Jim, Hannah, Selena in some fairy tale ass cottage in the mountains knitting a hello quilt. They are seen by a fighter jet. In the original ending, Hannah and Selena take Jim to an empty hospital, try to save him, but he dies on the table. Selena tells Hannah that they have to keep moving. The last shot is of them still wearing the dresses, covered in blood, carrying guns, presumably walking towards their death. It was changed to the happy ending because test audiences didn't like how sad hopeless the original felt. Too long didn't read test audiences are terrible things. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Charlie and Grandpa Joe blatantly ignored Wonka's request that no one try the fuzzy lifting drink. The only reason Charlie was able to relinquish the gobstopper was because he was the only one to evade catastrophe. Marizo Grandpa Joe were no more deserving for the empire than the other kids. Obligatory our Grandpa Joe had. Sierra Burgess is a loser. I think that movie has a lot of stereotypes and it doesn't seem realistic. Law-abiding citizen. It wasn't happy, but the bad guy certainly didn't win. You could argue he did because Fox said, "I don't make deals with murderers anymore," and walked into the sunset. But what a load of shit. Even if Fox decides to leave his legal practice, the cause Butler was fighting and killing for was just another fart in the wind. If you ask me, he should have taken out that meeting, threatened the president to gain a pardon, then run for president to institute legal reform, win, and then stack the Supreme Court. Bada bing bada boom. The Haunting of Hill House. The original ending would have been dope. Grease. Nobody needs to adopt a whole new persona for their lover. Be your own person, damn it. I'd like to have more realistic romance movies where they build up a great romantic relationship and all seems perfect and then he or she just leaves because of some shit. Because that's reality. Name some romantic movies where this should happen at the end. Not a movie, but Game of Thrones should ended with the others overrunning Westeros because the humans couldn't put aside their differences and cooperate. Would have been way better than this. Who has a better story than bullshit lol. The Ugly Duckling. It should just teach kids to not be ashamed of themselves. The recent Mortal Engines movie shat all over the ending from the book to make a happy ending instead. Not only is this a stupid way to treat the story we've loved for decades, it completely ruins any chance for a sequel as the rest of the story sort of relies on what happened at the end. Mind you, that film has a lot of problems. I'll never understand why scriptwriters are given a story one that's won multiple awards, fans across the globe, and had gained enough interest to make into a movie and think I can do this better. Completely changing characters, events, and the story. Artistic license is one thing, but most scriptwriters are not award-winning authors and have no business changing things so drastically. Harry Potter films had the same problem, albeit with less drastic changes. I love The Ritual, but I felt like the ending could have been a bit darker. Still a good ending, but the sense of inescapable doom was kind of undone in the last minute. My Sister's Keeper. No spoilers, but man did they ruin the ending by making it a happy one. It should have been like the book, so much more impactful. Pick a Hallmark movie